Now then, we're in the workshop, but for a different reason. Now recently I've got involved in some art projects, which is great. Really enjoyed it. And I went to Boston College of an evening, and I found that I re-engaged with my interest in art from when I was at school, because I was always in the art departments, woodwork departments, and we're doing pottery and all sorts of things. So that course is well worth the effort. It's brilliant. Anyway, that sort of rolled on to something else really, and I've got a couple of pieces there that I produced on that course, which I'd want to share, and I also want to give some feedback to myself whilst I'm in that moment of just seeing these pieces finally finished. I want to just remind myself how I'm thinking at the moment and share it with you. So let's have a look, but because this has then rolled on to other things like wild clay and wood-fired kilns, and we've got the space so we can build a wood-fired kiln, and we're doing a whole series about that as well. But let's have a look at this here and we'll see what happens. Okay, it started off, we were doing a ceramics module, as it were. We were doing 3 or 4 weeks of ceramics, and it's one of these things when you're on these sorts of courses, right at the start it's almost like creativity on demand, which you've got to get your head around. But then there was like the forewarning, right, next week we're going to do ceramics, so think about what you want to do. And some people may have noticed in all my, especially my home life in lockdown series, that in the background, screwed and nailed to various bits, there's these wooden Polynesian war mast type things cut with a chainsaw. So I thought, right, let's work on that. So I made a wooden form, and you can see the remnants of it. So I made a wooden form to sort of bring that into shape, and so I can lay the clay over it. Okay, and once you've laid the clay over it, then you can work on the eyes and the features and whatnot, and especially the mouth. Yeah, I had to cut a big chunk out of the wooden form to allow a big hole there. Anyway, this was the first attempt, and it's sort of alright. When you roll the clay out, you roll it out on, well, we were on a Hessian covered board, so that the clay doesn't stick, because the clay will stick if you roll it out on something smooth. So that's great, and I thought, oh, that's interesting, I shall keep that texture, and you can just about see that texture there. But that was all very well, and then, and sort of having lack of experience, there was talk of adding stain, which is a colouring that you could put on, and you could put it on before the first firing. But I didn't do that because I was focusing on other things. So this was then bisque fired, which is the initial firing to make it hard. And then I applied this, but that texture made applying this colour really quite difficult. Very difficult, in fact, and that's why this is all a bit blotchy, and I did actually abandon this, thinking, well, it's an experiment. But it's sort of come out all right-ish. Yeah. So there we go, that's that one. Lots more to talk about that, but we'll follow on. And then for the next project we had to do what's called an outcome, which is a finishing project for the course. and I was thinking about cuneiform writing. And cuneiform writing is a series of lines and dots and whatnot and wedges, and it goes right to the edge and then starts again and goes right to the edge. Now I don't know whether you read it that way or that way, but that's besides the point. So I came up with all these. Let me zoom in a bit. There we go. That's better. Let's zoom in a bit more. I came up with this. Now these are words that or phrases and sayings, lines of songs, bits out of books, all that sort of thing, that have sort of had a resonance with me, you know. And then you've got, and then one day you'll find 10 years have got behind you, Pink Floyd, yeah. Where else have we got? I mean, later on there's Standing on the Runway Waiting for Takeoff, which is Hawkwind. So there you go. So that was an attempt, and I just thought, oh, that's sort of interesting, but I didn't quite know where it was going. But I also learnt that I was trying to use the standard steel engineer stamps, and it didn't work, which was like, oh, that's a bit of a blow. But, you know, I was told by on the course that they got some rubber stamps, and these were wooden blocks with a rubber stamp on the bottom, and that worked a lot better. But there's something that I'm going to cover later on which may sort of affect that judgment. So this is what I made anyway, yeah, and that was then bisque fired, so it was just coloured like that. This isn't glazed on the back, so it was just like that but smooth. Okay, so that's that one. So then let's zoom out. We get to this big piece, and you can see I made a fresh wooden form, and you can see there where the features carved in the wooden form really push through. Yeah, so there we go. Where are we? I've got a lot to say about this, and I learnt a huge amount, but one of the things was that the sessions were 3 hours, and to create this and start putting the lettering on in 3 hours is impossible, absolutely impossible. I had a friend who was helping me, and we got to about there, yeah. So what we did was I printed out some strips of paper with all these phrases on, and I was able to cut them out and lay them on, and I'd worked out that the stamps were font 26, so I'd done it in that, so it meant that I could line things up, and then when I'm about to do one of these I take the paper off and do the words. So I was doing that, and that really cut down on the time, but we didn't get that far, so I had to come back the next day after having wrapped this up tightly so it didn't dry anymore. So dryness, there you go, yeah. What I realised was towards the end of that second day session, and it was 4 hours to get from there to there, was the fact that to actually get this right you want the clay surface relatively dry, not leather hard, which is, you know, you can scrape it, but drier than when you're moulding it. So that sort of works in with this 3 hour session. So effectively doing something like this, whether or not you could make this in one session and then wrap it up really tightly and then come back a week later and you could still work it, I suspect you could if you really wrapped it up. Some cling film cling film, and then several layers of plastic bags and whatnot. Then you could leave it on the wooden form, because there you go again. Yeah, if I left this on the wooden form, then the clay would dry and the clay would shrink, because clay shrinks 10% at least. Then, and it would squeeze on the wooden form and it would probably crack. So there's all those sort of limitations to things, which is sort of interesting, and you've got to work around it. So I learnt a huge amount, in so much as to do something this again, it's alright if you're doing it at home, because you can maybe leave it for 3 or 4 hours and then start the lettering. Yeah, or put a heat gun on there and start to dry the surface. But I suspect natural drying would be better, because it'd be drying from the inside out. So that's that. And then if you notice, there's a dip there. Well, this I think was caused by I'd finished the lettering, and then I went over it with a heat gun for half an hour, gently drying it, and then the two of us lifted this off the form, and I'd rolled a load of newspaper quite tight, and we just put it over the newspaper as a support. Well, I think that wasn't supported and it just collapsed in a bit. So loads of learning there, loads and loads of learning, but the moisture content of the surface, that's some. I'm going to have another go at one of these. I'm going to make a fresh form and do another one with the same words, but I'm going to get the surface a lot drier before I start. Right, are we there? We're nearly there. Okay, so then this is another thing that I'm considering. This, you can sort of read the words, but not very well. And this, you can read the words very well. So this was an underglaze, a blue underglaze, which is a pigment and some small form of glaze material and some clay. And so I wiped that on there and you couldn't see anything. And then I wiped it off. And I was really quite shocked, because there was no experience. I was like, what? I've ruined this. And then I wiped it off. And so you could just about see the words. And I thought, well, let's put that to one side and see what happens. Yeah, okay. So this one, I can't remember. I think that had been bisque fired. That's right, yeah. This one had been bisque fired, and then I just, having done this, I thought, no. So I got a blue stain, wiped a blue stain on there, yeah, and of course it was really dark, and then wiped it off again, yeah, and several times, and I thought, wow, that looks great, that looks really good. Yeah. So they were both sort of put to one side for the next session, and then on the next session we did glazing. So effectively we had a big, what I imagine was a, well, probably a 30-litre tub. No, it can't be that much. It's got to be like 20-litre tub, yeah. And I just dipped it in, and it was a transparent glaze, but it's white. So you dip that in there. In fact, I don't think I dipped this one in. I just wipe the surface. That's right, because when they go in the kiln, you've got to make sure that the edges or the bottoms don't have any glaze on them, for purposes of sticking to the kiln shelves. But this one was dipped in. Just dip one end in the bucket, turn it round, dip the other end in the bucket. And I think that was a problem. I mean, on the underside, that looks great, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah, you can hang this on a wall and it's mostly weatherproof and frostproof. But you can see here, perhaps you can, there is no glaze on that face because I've wiped it off. Yeah, wet cloth and wipe it off. But this side, the glaze is too thick. So, you know, we've allowed the stain to dry for 7 days, soak in and stabilise and whatever you want. And yeah, I'm using terms that are in my head, but actually whether they're right or wrong, I don't know. But really it would want, rather than dipping in, I think it should just want a pouring over and let it drain. Thing is, you're on bisque fire, so whatever watery material you put on there, it soaks straight in. So there's too much glaze on here, and especially on this side, it's sort of... And then the lettering on the tongue, which says words like time flow, has virtually disappeared. And that's just filled in with glaze, because there's a transparent glaze, because there's too much. So Mark 3 of one of these is going to take all of that into account. We're going to make a different form, and once I've put the clay on and worked it, let it dry for a while, yeah, and then start putting the words on again. I think I might try and use the same words, but maybe trim them down a bit. Yeah, stuff like having time to sort the mouse droppings from the peppercorns. That's from Jim Dodge, the book called Fup. It's quite a good one, really. Anyway, so where are we? Dry the surface more, put the words on, use an underglaze and wipe it off, and only a thin, very very thin transparent glaze, and probably try and get hold of a matte rather than this, which is, I don't know, is it silk or I'm not sure. So, but because the thing there is different glazes need different temperatures, so I'm not sure whether you can mix and match within a kiln because of the different temperatures required. But we're going to find out about kilns, all of us, because I'm going to have a go. So we've got wild clay, which is clay dug from the locality or close to, and then processed to get rid of any impurities like roots and bits of gravel and all that sort of thing, old nuts and bolts, and yeah, and then you add some fine sifted sand or really fine aggregate. Not aggregate's the wrong word, very small particles, and that sand does two things, but the primary thing is that it gives the clay a greater stability, and it doesn't shrink as much, and it's more resilient to thermal shock, etc, etc. So when you're firing it, if you've got a great amount of fine particles in your clay, which is called temper or grog, then you know you're less likely to get cracks happening and all that sort of thing. So we're going to do that, and we're going to make a wood-fired kiln. So follow me on that. I'm sure it'll be quite exciting. I've already decided where I'm going to put the kiln, and I've actually started. So I've cleared the area and started with some really lightweight footings, because no doubt whatever I make will be wrong, and you know, this is trial and error. So comments please, be really interested, and I will catch up with you soon. Cheers for now.